We have Marshall Ferguson joining us now for the Redtag.ca aerial report. And let's start in the West, Marsh, because I actually love this QB matchup. Because I love storylines, I love relationships. And when you think of the state and mindset that both QBs come into this game, what comes to mind?
Yeah, the thing that jumps out to me the most is that when Trevor Harris was doing his sit-downs with the CFL on TSN, the question that was asked of Trevor was, it seems like a very wide-open year. Seems like any of the 6 teams that are in the playoffs could win the Grey Cup this season. Do you feel that way? And Trevor goes, no, I just think we'll win it all. And I actually screen capped it because I'm like, this is going to look really bad when he loses at home against BC because Rider Nation will eat him up for that. And then he didn't. And so now I'm like, well, I'm kind of convinced that they've got some energy going here. The interesting dynamic in this one, I think, is Trevor's got all this confidence. I'm going through it, and I'm like, man, Saskatchewan seems like they have the edge in this, even though Winnipeg has home field advantage. And Winnipeg, as we obviously know, only got home field advantage because they were able to get the win that was at their back and all the rest. This game just as easily could be at Mosaic. And the other part of it is that I wonder whether or not Zach has that kind of quiet motivation inside of him of, yeah, I do have my legacy cemented, but I really think that we should have a couple more than we've had here over the last couple of years because Toronto in 22 and Montreal in 23 did their thing and took us down. I wonder if he's kind of going, you know what, I'm done with this. Let's just go and get the ultimate prize.
When you look at these two quarterbacks and how they'll need to lead their teams, one of the things that sticks out are the turnovers. Zach Collaros had 15 for himself, and Trevor Harris had 7, although he did play less games than Zach did this year. This is not Zach's best season. Well, we can all look at that, and he'll admit that as well. But he's where he needs to be, where he wants to be right now. What does he need to do to not add to that total so that he can lead his team to victory this coming week?
Yeah, I mean, Corey Mace, certainly when he packed up all of his baggage from the Argonauts, he brought a plus 20 turnover margin with him when he moved to Saskatchewan, which is I'm not sure something that I thought was sustainable after the Argonauts were so dominant. So if I'm Zach, it's how much do I want to send the ball down the field? The statistics are a little bit misleading because the start of the season was so poor. But if Zach is going to take shots down the field, it's very apparent based on what just happened to VA that the back end of the Riders' defense is ready and willing to improve on their ridiculous turnover margin. So Zach he's going to have to make smart decisions, I think, especially early on. But at some point, Zach's going to open it up and challenge that defense vertically. And then it becomes a question of, can his receivers make better plays on the football than Saskatchewan's defensive backs? Because all year long, if you're wearing green and you're flying around on the back end of that defense, you've been picking people off consistently. And that's a huge risk, I think, for Zach. Because you guys can imagine Princess Auto, it's 2nd and 5, and Zach rips it 35 yards down the field, middle of the first quarter, gets picked off, and the air is just going to go whoosh. Out of that stadium, they're going to go, oh, no. Yeah, it's a fun mind game to try and crawl inside of Zach's head early on in this game.
Give us the stats that aren't misleading, that we should care about.
Some of these are interesting. Collaros, 61% of his pass attempts this season are under 9 yards. For Trevor Harris, that number is actually 3% lower. It's 58.4%. So Collaros is actually more likely this season to go underneath, which speaks to what I talked about earlier on of, Zach is not stretching the field as often as he has in previous seasons. Then you talk about, okay, so if Zach is the one who's throwing it more conservatively underneath at a higher percentage, well, what's the completion percentage on throws that are 20 yards or more down the field? Trevor has a higher completion percentage by 11% on throws that are down the field than Zach does this year. So compared to previous years, especially the last 2, they've kind of swapped roles, where Trevor is now completing at a higher percentage down the field and Zach is actually more likely to throw it underneath. I found those 2 numbers to be interesting. Then the touchdown to interception ratio, just because turnovers are so important. For Trevor, it's 2.22 touchdown to interception ratio, and for Zach, it's 1.13 because he just had that horrific start to the season. And then this one, again, is I think, telling because, yes, they played a different number of games because Trevor was out and Zach had a slow start to the year. But when you look at the percentage of their games that they started this year where they ended with at least 300 passing yards, Zach has only thrown for 300 yards or more in 23% of his starts this year. Trevor, half of his games, 50%. So it's almost as though Trevor Harris, based on this season, is twice as likely to go for over 300 yards passing than Collaros is, which, again, taking recent history into account, doesn't really seem to make sense. But when you break down the numbers and you look at it, you go, man, Trevor's playing at a really high level, because a lot of these numbers look very similar to Collaros from previous years when we've talked about him in the MOP conversation.
Can't wait to see how these games play out. Much smarter about how things might play out after talking to you. Thanks so much, Marsh.